समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा?
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Tensions between India and Bangladesh continue to soar. There were mass protests outside the Bangladesh High Commission in the national capital today. This even as one of Bangladesh's leading journalists describes the phase his country is going through as an era of murder. This after media houses were torched by angry Islamist mobs. A parliamentary panel led by Member of Parliament Shashi Tharoor has warned that the situation unfolding in Bangladesh could be India's biggest strategic challenge since 1971. The panel has also underscored how Pakistan and China are playing their own games in troubled waters. How might India respond next? Well, we'll be speaking to Shashi Tharoor in a moment from now. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, Sheikh Hasina has released an audio message saying she stands in solidarity with Dipu Chandra, the Hindu man lynched to death in Bangladesh, a death that has caused outrage here in India. There were mass protests outside the Bangladesh High Commission, but security forces ensured that the complex of the Bangladesh High Commission and all the diplomats inside remained absolutely safe. In the meantime, in Bangladesh, there are anti-India mobs who are on the rampage. They have been so for the last few days. We've seen a man lynched to death. We've also seen cultural institutions attacked, with even tablas and harmoniums not being spared. In this environment, India has shown restraint, and India has partially restored visa services as well in parts of Bangladesh. But the big question is, how should India respond next? Shashi Tharoor leads a parliamentary panel and makes a big warning on Indo-Bangladesh relations, warning that the kind of anti-India Islamist sentiment across Bangladesh, probably supported covertly or overtly by Pakistan and China, could pose one of India's biggest security challenges since 1971. I want to welcome to the program our newsmaker today. Mr. Tharoor is with us. Thank you very much. The chair of the Parliament Committee on External Affairs, having just a few days ago submitted this very timely report. I want your overview. I've, of course, been through the key points of your arguments. You're talking about a kind of virtual tinderbox that Bangladesh has become, and one with direct consequences for India's security interests. What alarmed you and the parliamentary panel that you led the most?
Well, actually, ironically, when the report came out, things were calming down. And what was interesting was that we were in a position to take a broader view, excuse me, of the situation. And we were suggesting in the report that some things, such as, for example, our issuance of visas, could be normalized and improved because a lot of Bangladeshis were anxious to receive visas for medical purposes to India, shopping, family visits, and other things. And we wanted to encourage more people-to-people interaction. We were concerned, on the other hand, about some of the elements who had been unleashed by the student protests of last year, which include Islamist elements like the previously banned Jamaat and other groups, some of whom were rather radical and inflammatory in their language. The student protesters themselves have said some very irresponsible things about relations with India. But at the same time, we were anxious that the government and people of Bangladesh head towards a free and fair election in February, which would, we believed, help stabilize the situation. And we had, of course, asked the government to proceed in the direction of keeping in touch with the authorities in Bangladesh and encouraging such a development that is a free and fair election. So this is broadly the thrust of the report. But in recent days, just after the report was published, things took a dramatic turn for the worse. You had the death in a Singapore hospital of the student leader who'd been shot a few days previously. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever to believe that India would have any interest in fomenting unrest in Bangladesh. We are a country that values stability on our borders and amongst our neighbors. It's the last thing we would want to see happen, but many chose to blame India and start protests against India and make speeches against India, which were quite unwarranted, including one inflammatory speech to a rather large group of protesters, claiming that Bangladesh had the capacity and the intent to separate the 7 northeastern states from the rest of India and so on, which was absolute nonsense, but at the same time, indicative of the kind of mood that was being stoked up in the streets. Now, remember, there is a lot of lawlessness about the lynching of Dipu Chandra, the Hindu man who was falsely accused of blasphemy and who was killed in the most horrendous way after the police had taken custody of him, which is what is completely inexcusable, suggests that the government's condemnation is hollow in one very important respect. A government is supposed to have a monopoly of violence in any country. A government is supposed to control law and order. A government can't just wring its hands and say sorry and deplore a tragedy, as this government statement has done. What it should have been doing is sending police out and, if necessary, the army out to curb this kind of violence and lawlessness. So what I would first of all hope that the Indian government is doing, though India has been very circumspect, understandably, in its own response, India should, I think, be going to the Bangladesh authorities and saying, this is not acceptable. You know, when this is happening in your country, you are the ones in charge. You have to stop it. And that's the very, very important message I believe we need to give, because if this continues, things can get very badly out of hand. We did, in fact, shut down our visa services in 3 of our consulates, which are called assistant high commissions in Bangladesh, being a Commonwealth country. We have now resumed 3 of them. It's only one, Chittagong, where we have now continued to suspend the services because there was an attack at the gate in Chittagong, at the gate of the High Commission. So we obviously have to worry about security there. But in other places, we have managed to actually overlook our own concerns for the safety of our people, and we have gone ahead and actually opened in Khulna, in Rajshahi, and in Sylhet. So that means that we are actually allowing people to come and apply for visas. Meanwhile, Bangladesh in Delhi has shut down their visa. Now, not that Indians are clamoring for visas in anything like the numbers that the Bangladeshis are looking for visas to India. But I have to say that for us, all of this is a retrograde step when it comes to moving towards normalization. At this stage, I think our principal concern must be stability and calm.
Okay, I'll get to how that stability and calm can be reached, if at all. But your report, which, as you said, came out when things did not look so dire, did talk about Pakistan's role in particular and China's role to some extent. Now, when we look at the fact, Mr. Tharoor, that the anti-India student leader who was shot dead, Osman Hadi, he used to famously or notoriously talk about a so-called Greater Bangladesh, in which, of course, the reference was to include our northeastern states as part of Bangladesh. When you join the dots between these sort of statements and the kind of statements that have been coming from Pakistan, where Pakistan's army chief, Asim Munir, spoke about the next attack possibly coming from the east, the ISI chief repeated that, there seems to be some connection between the events. Do you see that connection clearly? Your report does talk about it. I'm wondering how deep you think the connection is.
Look, I mean, the fact is that there's very little doubt that there's been a resurgence of this kind of Islamist solidarity argument, which, of course, Pakistan, particularly today's Pakistan under Field Marshal, as he calls himself, Munir, has definitely become identified with an assertive and aggressive Islamism. This is something which I think does not bode very well for us, particularly with talk of a mutual defense pact with Bangladesh. And in both cases, China is playing an unhelpful role, because China, to begin with, has a very major vested interest in Pakistan. And don't forget that apart from the fact that 81% of Pakistan's military equipment, planes, missiles, all of that come from China, there is also the fact that the single largest project in the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the highway running all the way through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir all the way to Gwadar Port in southwest Pakistan or in Balochistan. Now, this gives China a very, very specific vested interest in Pakistan. And on top of that, you also have the fact that the Pakistanis have never quite forgiven India for what happened in 1971. And any opportunity that they see in the short or long term to reverse that by bringing Bangladesh over into a sort of, it won't in me formally be an East Pakistan, but to be an Eastern ally of Pakistan, this is something that many people in Rawalpindi GHQ would dearly like to see happen. So all of these are matters that we in India have to be extremely conscious of and alert to. See, don't forget that when Hasina was in power, Bangladesh had ceased to be the soft underbelly of India. There was a time, even when the BNP government was in power, so civilian government, not particularly allied to Pakistan, but nonetheless at that time there were, for example, northeastern terror groups and other militant organizations that would conduct raids or attacks in Assam and other places in the northeast and then cross the border and seek safe haven in Bangladesh with impunity. Sheikh Hasina ended that. She arrested some of these characters and handed them over to India, and she clamped down on this kind of easy ingress for these groups. So a resurgence of that, apart from Pakistan and Bangladesh, it hurts India in its own right. But of course, Pakistan and Bangladesh will see this as one more way of stirring up trouble for India. On top of that, you've got China's interest. China has been talking to Bangladesh about facilities for their military vessels and so on, and the ports, particularly of Chattogram. We are looking at Pakistan visiting very frequently. I think the Pakistani leadership, in one form or the other, from foreign minister to prime minister to others, have been talking to the Bangladeshi leaders multiple times in the last year. So as a parliamentary standing committee on external affairs, we felt duty bound to take note of all this, not to express alarm, but to express concern and to express our own desire to ensure that we would do our best to offset this. I think the general feeling amongst the members, and I have to be careful when I speak for them, we normally don't speak about these closed-door discussions until after the report is public, but since the report is public, I think I can say that the membership, by and large, felt that the relationship could take a definite turn for the better after elections, when there would be an elected civilian government in place, not an interim authority, and we would be able to discuss in a normal government-to-government basis. What worries me now is we are not even sure in this unstable, unsettled environment whether the elections will take place as scheduled. There have been talks, as you know, some indications that the student groups and the Jamaat, who are pretty much together in this election, that they are feeling unready, that all the public indications, I'm not sure how effective polling is in Bangladesh, but the general sense of keen observers has been that these two are not likely to make as impressive a showing as they would like, and that the BNP, the Bangladesh National Party of Khalida Zia, was more likely to do well after the banning of the Awami League. So in these circumstances, I think it would serve the interests of some of these lawless elements on the street to get the elections postponed until these characters feel more ready to assume power. So all of this gives us a very uncertain situation. Jamaat won the student elections in some of Dhaka University and a couple of other key universities. These are not small things. I don't remember whether we put that into the report or not, but it's something that I'm very conscious of. And I do believe that we must understand that some of these things can be a harbinger of things to come. The Awami League's victories in the student union elections were what prefigured what happened in 70 and 71 in the then East Pakistan. So we have to be very, very wary about what this indicates for the current mood of the opinion leaders in Bangladesh.
Now, Mr. Tharoor, Sheikh Hasina is still in India, and in your report, you do emphasize that India is not facilitating political activity by her. She quite simply arrived here, enabled actually by the Bangladeshi military. At that point, nobody knew that it would be for so long. We don't know if she is still here because she feels safest here or because no other country would have her. It is quite clear that in the current situation, it is not safe for her to return to Bangladesh. Her party is not even being allowed to take part in the elections. But a number of Bangladeshis will say India has chosen a side by continuing to keep her there? I'm sure you had a chance, as parliamentary panels do, to get a sense of the government's mind on this, and you have your own opinion. What do you think of Ms. Hasina's continued presence here? There have been some who have suggested that perhaps while she is here, she should not make public statements. I know the panel's report gets into that, but I'll let you explain further.
No, I mean, my point really on this one, Barkha, is that the government is very conscious of all these points you've just made. So are we on the panel. And what we felt was that the government's assurance that ours is a purely humanitarian gesture to a leader who, frankly, we've had good relations with and who came seeking shelter in our country, that the decent thing to do was to give her that shelter, but to request her not to carry out any political activities from our soil. And that is the picture that we too have portrayed in our report and have endorsed. Now, while we were discussing all of this, as you know, there was a decision made by a panel, a trial court in Bangladesh to sentence her to death, which changes in many ways the nature of the appeal by Bangladesh for her deportation, because you're basically sending somebody to a certain assassination. I think she obviously would not be willing to go in those circumstances, and India would certainly be very hesitant to do this to a friend, because you do this to one friend, nobody else will be your friend in the future, Barkha, because they will say India couldn't even stand up for somebody when their life was in danger.
And you're sure that to send her back would be, as you said, to send her to her assassination? You're sure she would be killed?
Well, that's what the sentence says. They've passed a death sentence on her already. It's not as if it's speculation. It is an order of execution. So you're sending her back to a country where she's been ordered to be executed. She'll be executed the next day. You can't do that. I mean, I think this is something which even at the United Nations conventions and so on would understand our stand, because the Refugee Convention basically says that you don't send people back to countries where they fear persecution. And the fact is that assassination is the most extreme form of persecution. So I would not suggest that somebody facing a death sentence could be sent up. But again, I'm not in the government. I speak as an MP with a point of view. And my point of view is that the government in any case has assured us they are studying the legal implications. They do have a treaty with Bangladesh that covers some of this. That treaty has certain provisions which include certain exceptions. And all of this has to be studied by legal experts and decisions made. I think it's safe to say that no one is going to be taking a hasty decision at a time of great chaos and lawlessness in Bangladesh. This is not a time for us to do that. The government has, by and large, taken the line that it's for Sheikh Hasina to decide how long she wants to stay, and that they're not forcing her. Now, with the death sentence, I think it becomes very clear that the only circumstance in which she would leave India is to another country where she feels safe. It would not be to Bangladesh until that death sentence is revoked. And therefore, let's face it, Barkha, if India has a choice, I'm just guessing here, I don't speak for the government, but if India has a choice between sending a friend to her the gallows or the executioner's firing squad versus offering them hospitality for a while longer, what do you think you and I would do if we were the government? I just don't think it would be decent to send her back at this time. And I think many Indians would not understand if India were to give in to this merely in the so-called interest of good relations with Bangladesh at a time when Bangladesh is not doing very much to earn a good relationship with India either.
Yeah, there are those in the military in particular, Mr. Tharoor, who believe that the larger game plan afoot might be to provoke some sort of military conflict between India and Bangladesh, though this may have sound, implausible maybe even a few months ago. And the thinking is, you have Hasina's son who says that groups that were banned by his mother, groups like the elements of the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba are today able to have a certain degree of operational freedom in Bangladesh. There are military experts. Yeah, and there are military experts who are warning that the next terror attack could come from Bangladesh, and that would be then that kind of provocation that may be part of this kind of devious plan. Could you speak to that? Is it your assessment, was it the panel's assessment, that Pakistani-backed groups, terror groups like the Jaish and Lashkar, other extremist elements, are now operating with freedom from Bangladesh and pose a direct threat to India?
I think it's very clear that we were conscious of the risk. We don't, as a parliamentary panel, get access to classified information. So our intelligence people, for example, would have far more insight into that than we would have had. But let me just say that from our point of view, just what is publicly known and available suggests that we have enough reasons to be concerned about precisely what you mentioned. There is no doubt that the Pakistani ISI has been active whenever circumstances have permitted it in both Nepal and Bangladesh, because for them, they have to open up different fronts against India than the tried and tested Western front through Kashmir, which is essentially their only means of effective ingress into India for their various nefarious purposes, including terror attacks. If they can find an easier way, for example, via Bangladesh, they would leap at it. At the same time, the panel did urge that we complete the remaining kilometers of fencing. We have done a good job of fencing something like 75 to 80% of the border with Bangladesh, but the last portions that remain are difficult terrain, and we've asked the government to do everything possible to expedite that, precisely because we are conscious of the danger, the security danger that could emanate from there. But on the basis not of any intelligence estimate, we don't actually summon the investigative or intelligence agencies to the committee, but on the basis of what's publicly available assessments. And you and I are reading the same newspapers and media accounts. We know that this is a real concern. There's no doubt in my mind that the Pakistani military's interest in Bangladesh has gone up several notches in the last 12 months. And that includes, I have no doubt, the ISI as well, the military intelligence apparatus. We'd be foolish to be oblivious to that. And I'm sure our government and the necessary agencies are not oblivious to that.
You've been, before you were a politician, a sort of consummate diplomat at the United Nations. If there was anyone talking about a possible off-ramp, do you still see an off-ramp for tensions? Do you see an opportunity for de-escalation? Or are we too deep now in this minefield of a series of bad decisions by the Yunus government that have made the situation, at least for the foreseeable future, unmendable?
Look, let me say very truthfully that the cards are in the hands of Mr. Yunus's government. That is, they can choose to wring their hands, as they've been doing, and just issue statements deploring the violence. That isn't going to make any difference to anybody. Or they can choose to crack down on the lawlessness, which frankly their own sort of student revolution has unleashed, by actually restoring some order to the streets of Bangladesh, by giving security to the minorities in practice, not through words and press releases, but by actually having police out there on the roads and having army where the police are proving ineffective, and by providing greater security to minorities, and indeed, for that matter, to the Indian consulates, the Indian Assistant High Commissions. All of these things, if the government were to take visible steps to do, that would certainly dramatically ease tensions, and India in turn could contribute by publicly recognizing these steps and thanking the government and welcoming them and so on, and thereby creating more of a positive narrative around it. Right now, what's happening is lawlessness is rampant, tensions are high. The liberal media outlets of Daily Star and Pratham Alu have been burned down by the protesters. They couldn't bring out their editions for 2 days. It's a very dramatic situation, and in that dramatic situation, Barkha, an off-ramp does not seem immediately available. But I do believe the government has the capacity to create conditions for an off-ramp by actually taking law and order back in their hands. When you form a government, it comes with certain responsibilities. You may have come to power through a protest movement, but you cannot perpetually enable protests or your country will crumble, it will fall apart. And to my mind, I think we really do have to accept that at this stage, Mr. Yunus has to do certain things. I have a great respect for him from his Nobel Prize winning days, and he's a figure who enjoys international credibility. That credibility is in jeopardy now because of what's going on. And I would call on him to earn his good name back by stopping this kind of nonsense that's going on these days.
But let me ask you this towards the end. Mehfouz Anam, whom I know you know very well, the editor
of... a very close friend of mine. We debated against each other, he for Dhaka University, me for Delhi University, way back in 1972 after the Liberation War. And I've known him for over half a century. He's a dear friend and a fine editor. By the way, he had his own troubles with Hasina because he
I
stood
was
up
just,
for
I was just
freedom.
going to say that I was just going to say that he was a Hasina critic, and he is
That's
saying
right.
today that this is
And
the
she
era
is
of
now
murder.
a visible victim of this, because whatever was wrong under Hasina, and she was by no means a full-fledged liberal Democrat that you and I would necessarily applaud in every step she took. Nonetheless, the papers were functioning. There was some room for criticism of the government. There was some room to express your freedom of opinion, etc. Today, I mean, without
Okay.
very much worse.
Maybe.
And as Mahfouz and others have said, there was a real concern, frankly, that they might actually kill some of these journalists. There were people frantically calling their families out of these offices saying, come and rescue us. It was a terrible situation.
So my question related to this is, do you think there's a real danger of Bangladesh becoming a kind of miniature version of Pakistan, where there is a pan-Islamism sweeping through the country, there is a lawlessness? The only really big difference is that the Bangladesh military has not yet revealed its hand completely, whereas in Pakistan, the military completely controls the politics. But is there a danger of Bangladesh slipping into that rabbit hole, a la Pakistan? And B, do you really think Dr. Yunus can control the street anymore?
Well, he certainly has to try. And, he does, after all, have the authority to order the police and to order the army. It's not a system like India where the police come under the state government. There are no state governments in Bangladesh. He can give instructions anywhere in the country for the police to act. And if they can't deliver the results, for the army to act. I don't know what he's waiting for. But having said that, the army is not as Islamicized as in Pakistan. Because don't forget that, for the last several years, promotions and so on have been under a fairly secular government, that of the Awami League. And so a lot of the top echelons of the army are not considered people whom India would necessarily find difficult to deal with. I'm not suggesting we are in any way keen on having a military rule in Bangladesh. I'm just saying it is not the same thing as if the Pakistani military come to power, and de facto they're in power anyway, because I don't think anyone thinks that the civilian government in Pakistan can do a single thing that the military doesn't agree with. But in Bangladesh, the military has consciously taken a backseat. There are many reasons. The first is that they were not particularly sympathetic to the student revolt, but they did not want to shoot on the students. And that's why they urged Hasina to leave, saying, we can't shoot on the students, and so you better go. But they, for example, they very much value their opportunities in UN peacekeeping. UN peacekeeping options are not available to armies who conduct coups, and the Bangladeshi army would much rather be doing UN peacekeeping than running the Bangladesh government. So, I don't think that the army is rushing to take over the country. But I will say that if the worst comes to the worst and this lawlessness continues to get out of hand, that is certainly a possibility, and not one that we can't live with. I mean, I'm afraid, what we want above all is calmness and stability. And whoever delivers it, ideally Mr. Yunus and his government, we would applaud. But if it's not going to, the government can't do it, somebody should, because the alternative is too awful to contemplate.
A final question. How would you, in your personal opinion, but also based on your interactions with top diplomats of the government who would have briefed your panel, and again, this without giving away anything sensitive, how would you think would be the appropriate way or the wisest way for India to respond at this moment?
I think India should be talking to the interim government authorities, telling them how important it is from our point of view that the situation not get further out of hand, urging them to take decisive steps to bring order to the streets, to ensure security for minorities, to ensure security for our assistant high commissions. We should be urging the Bangladesh government that we will continue playing a constructive role, that we can assure them we had nothing to do with any of the incidents that have triggered this kind of nonsense, but that we cannot just take this kind of accusations indefinitely like this, and to urge the Bangladeshis in the interests of their own stability and their own welfare to bring about calm sooner rather than later. We can even offer help if they want it. I mean, if they want any expertise in crowd control, or they want a contingent of CRPF to come, we can offer to send them. I'm not saying they're highly unlikely to welcome it, but I'm just saying we can say we are here to help you. We're not here to impose anything on you, but for God's sake, solve this problem and put some gentle diplomatic pressure on them, and not so gentle diplomatic pressure on them. Now, a lot depends on each day's news, Barkha. The tempers are flaring on both sides. There were some protesters outside the Bangladesh High Commission here who were very agitated and upset. Of course, our police are able to ensure they don't go and attack the entrance or hurt any Bangladeshi diplomats. India is not Bangladesh yet, but at the same time, we don't want tempers to be allowed to get any further out of control. So the sooner that place calms down, the sooner this place will calm down. And I think calm and stability are very much the priority for both countries. And I would urge that everything be done that's possible to convey to the Bangladeshis that we have no vested interest in seeing this nonsense continue. We would very much like to do anything we can, including public appeals, whatever they want, to bring about calm. But we urge them to fulfill their responsibilities as a government and actually bring about calm and order to the streets.
Thank you, Shashi Tharoor. We leave it there. Shashi Tharoor, who chairs the Parliamentary Panel on External Affairs, has a very, very important and timely report out on the India-Bangladesh equation. And as he mentioned, since the release of the report, things have only got worse. Thank you, Shashi. Always learn a lot from your erudition and insights. Have a great evening and hope to talk to you again soon.
All the best. Thank you, Barkha.
Bye-bye.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.